just like us to link up with my colleague Sophia Wanuna, joining us from the Great Rift Valley Lodge, where IEBC is conducting that workshop until tomorrow evening. Sophia, thank you very much for joining us. So let's just get straight into the agenda of this particular workshop. Is it really to look back? Because, I mean, with the letter that came out last week, quite a number of issues came to the fore about, you know, the wrangling and the questioning between Chiloba and Chebukati. So this particular workshop, is it to look back and, of course, bring out the issues and reconcile these two people, or is it to have a conversation and discussions around the next fresh presidential election, which is just 35 days? So what really is the agenda?
Good morning, Betty. As you said, we are at the Great Rift Hotel, and we are here to cover the Great Rift within the IEBC. And the main agenda, as you asked, is indeed to reconcile those issues emerging from the IEBC, the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission. I can confirm just a few moments ago, we witnessed the chairman, IEBC, Wafula Chebukati, arriving here, and we know the meetings have since commenced at the conference room. So it's a retreat for the Commission to really iron out and deal with the issues that the country has been witnessing over the past couple of days. Of course, those issues hitting a crescendo last week, Betty, when that memo from the chair to the CEO leaked, a memo that raised very tough questions in regard to the August the 7th general election, more specifically the presidential election that was invalidated by the Supreme Court. And so questions in regard to what led to the issues that were witnessed then. But we understand today that memo may not be on the agenda. Why? Because it may derail efforts to bring parties to see eye to eye, parties to be able to actually have conversation. Because remember what happened is after that memo leaked, we then saw another statement from 5 commissioners, although one or 2 at the time had disowned that particular statement. One then went back on that disowning of the memo, or rather of that statement, to associate with himself with the other group. While we understand the other commissioner had said he stands on the side of the chair of the IEBC. So we hear from our sources that today, first priority, Betty, is for the teams. That's the commission, the secretariat, the key departments and their heads to be able to sit down and talk and bring out the issues that are emerging. But in as far as dealing with the contents of the memo, that is not I beg your pardon, is not going to be a priority this morning and throughout the day here at the Great Rift as they converge and get down to even looking forward to that repeat presidential poll, Betty.
You know, the memo really is not part of the main agenda. Isn't it just like sweeping dirt under the carpet? Because all these issues that were raised in that memo were extremely fundamental to the whole process, whether looking back or looking forward. So really, I mean, how is it then that, you know, the memo will not be, the questions raised by that memo will not be part of the discussion of this particular workshop?
Betty, it's largely seen as a question of you bring up the memo and you lose the point completely in as far as getting constructive conversations around and about the underlying issues in the commission, because the memo was from the chair to the CEO. Our understanding is responses to that memo have been prepared by the CEO's office, but yet to be officially submitted. So to bring up the memo in a plenary, which is what they're having, really then is just to have a back and forth, and it will play out perhaps even as we saw last week when we had commissioners saying a different thing from what the chair had pronounced himself on. So it is not that they're ignoring it. I think the gravity of that memo is top of mind on every of the commissioners, or every of the secretariat members, IEBC as a whole. But I think there is a way in which they have agreed to approach it. So that first there is that of response by the CEO actually being handed in. And then after that, they're able to move forward, because to avoid an antagonistic situation, we understand from within that there is no more intention to keep throwing each other under the bus, because those who support the argument or are opposed to the chair's memo and actions, who support the CEO, argue that the CEO could in essence as well put the chair to task in his responses, because the issues raised, in a sense, also have the chair tied in, because the back does stop with him. And the questions that then the CEO would pose is, with all these things not happening or failing, perhaps you are signing off on some of them, or you are aware of certain processes and procedures. So the chair then, in that sense, could not wholly absolve himself. That is some of the arguments we're hearing being made by those that are supporting the camp allied, like, quote unquote, if you like, to the CEO. So primary and of focus today, Betty, at least at the very beginning, is to get a cohesive team, is to get a team that can actually communicate, is to get a team that is focused, back on track, because that repeat presidential election is just 35 days away, as you said, and that must happen. Otherwise, there will be a constitutional crisis. So this is a team keen to build. It's sort of like a team building in essence. And I understand they've never had one since these commissioners came into office 7 months ago. Most of their meetings have all been work. So they're geared towards at least just reading from the same script, issues aside and everything else to be resolved thereafter. And perhaps most of those issues, like the memo, will be discussed and deliberated on further once they return to Nairobi. But for now, is to just iron out those very rough, edgy, crucial areas that have emerged and played out in the public.
All right, talking about those rough edges and the issues that, they have been dealing with, one very important piece of information could be that ruling, the full one, by the Supreme Court. We're expecting that is going to be given in the next couple of days. So let's talk about them working without that benefit of having and really understanding why, indeed, this election was nullified. Of course, we know the skeleton reason, but we're waiting for that ruling that will give us in-depth analysis from the judges about what went wrong. So really, are we likely to see them having another workshop or other meetings that will be discussing and putting into focus the issues, the full details of the Supreme Court ruling?
Betty, and that's an issue that has come up in as far as many questioning. You remember that project team that was named by the chair to manage the presidential repeat election. Many asked, on what basis are those changes being made now that we're yet to receive that reasoned out judgment from the Supreme Court. But you could see, in a sense, some of this conflict, Betty, started emerging, or the rain really beating the IEBC after the ruling by the Supreme Court. Remember, the statement from the chair was that whilst there had been new commissioners before this last election, the Secretariat had largely remained the same. There had been no changes. There had been no, in terms of new appointments or movement in as far as personnel is concerned. And he had indicated that there would be changes, that this new election, the presidential election, would not be with the same staff as at least at the Secretariat level, and even went ahead to invite the DPP. So in as far as some of the things we are seeing happen, whether it's personnel change, which has been opposed by both sections or areas of the political divide, internally it has also caused a lot of discomfort. But what we understand with those changes being made is the realization that if that harsh indictment by the Supreme Court in their ruling, of course talking about irregularities and illegalities being committed, then that means some people committed those illegalities and irregularities were behind, the doings of individuals, and so there have to be changes being made, is the reasoning behind that. So yes, there is an understanding that they are handicapped in as far as not having that reasoned out judgment, which would give better understanding and clarity in as far as what they're doing. And we even had the chair urging the Supreme Court judges to make sure that reasoned out judgment comes out as soon as possible, so they can clearly then look at those issues that had been highlighted or would be highlighted by the judges in as far as what they need to deal with. But this has clearly turned out to be quite the battle. The CEO on one side, the chair on the other side, and it will be important and critical and crucial to see, Betty, how this ends up.
All right, two last questions, Sophia, before I let you go. Also, just putting into focus this project team, we understand, of course, from last week, this new team was created to lead and conduct and oversee this fresh presidential election. With it, do we know the kind of influence that Ezra Chiloba, if any, will have still in regards to the election and how it will be conducted? Is it that he's going to be hands-off? Will we, even as Kenyans, get to understand, or will the IEBC Commission come out and say that, this is exactly who's going to be handling what, especially with, this commission, members of the Secretariat having been said to have been pushed aside. There are people who are saying maybe it was cosmetic, but really, will we get to understand who will be doing what with this project team being put to conduct the election?
So the project team, yes, was announced, Betty, by the chair, but that's, again, a contentious issue because commissioners saying they were not consulted. And what we hear is that it has yet to take effect. Of course, throughout the day today, we'll be seeking to find out if those members are here of that project team, although we do know, other than the Secretariat, the commissioners, senior heads of departments as well are here. So it's very likely that they would be here. But as to whether they've actually gotten down to work as a project team is another question which will seek answers from the IEBC meeting here. But you asked a question about the CEO and his role. It's important to note that he's not been fired. He has not been sent on compulsory leave, as those rumors at some time were indicating. He's still very well in office. He is the accounting officer, in essence, of the IEBC. So even these 12 billion shillings that the Commission is now asking from Treasury to conduct the repeat election, he's the person who writes to the Treasury to be able to get that money. And remember, a lot of what happens in an election as far as the details of it, the workings of it, that happens at the Secretariat level. So to dislodge the CEO at this particular point is argued as a move that would put the Commission in quite a dicey situation. However, important to also note, you have NASA, the National Super Alliance, led by Raila Odinga, as late as yesterday and perhaps even today during their rallies, they have made it a point in their pronouncements during their rallies that they will not be party to that repeat election with Chiloba Ezra as the CEO, because they say he's the head of the Secretariat running the election that was botched. And on the other side, in a televised interview, we're also hearing the Deputy President, William Ruto, last night casting aspersions on the chair and talking about night meetings with their competitors is how he described it. So you can see the politics of this, Betty, really being intertwined with the management aspect of running the election. And so messy, at least, to say about the situation that IEBC finds itself in. And confidence levels as well is worrying, because those then get to dwindle with Kenyans watching this debacle play out ahead of the repeat poll. And yet such a huge mandate rests their hands. So we will wait to get clarification. But what we can ascertain is that all the commissioners are here, the Secretariat key officials and heads of departments as well are here, and they're hoping that at the end of this, it will not be the Great Rift anymore, but it will be a commission speaking with one voice, Betty.
Wanuna, they're reporting from the Great Rift Valley Lodge about that workshop that is currently ongoing at the Great Rift Valley Lodge of the IEBC officials. We'll be getting to hear more from her later on here on the show. So